Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good, mate.
Everyone going well? Everyone going well? Everyone having a good day? Having a good time?
It's a nice day outside, even if it is cold.
Is it?
No, I can see straight through. I've done this before, straight through out my studio doors into a little lounge through the glass ranch sliders, and all I can see is sun bathing on the plants outside at the moment. So yeah, looks pretty good from here.
Yeah, I can see some slight sun over there. So I believe you, Chewy. I'm sure when I go finally get outside, I'll see it.
Once I leave here today, because of the weather, I think it's going to be, I have to spell this, because if I don't, someone in the room will get excited. I will take the DOG to the PARK in the CAR. Those are the code words to play with the BALL. So I can't say those words, because if I say those words, I'll have someone starting to cry and whine who's just over there at the moment. But I think that'll be my objective afterwards. Because the thing about Dunedin weather, and I know people say things like, oh, you can't beat Wellington on a good day. The thing about Dunedin weather is how changeable it is. Even the day of, you look at the weather forecast and you're like, oh, it's going to be fine this afternoon. And, a good proportion of the time it's completely wrong. So if I see good weather and the dog didn't get a run yesterday because of the weather, I will get out there and take the ball to the PARK. I nearly said it. I can't say it. And have a look or two. You get a guy to come as a person to come walk the dogs, Chewy?
Yeah, twice a week.
Yeah.
Just because my partner and I we're often out, and she's not an outdoor dog mostly. So stops her chewing up the couch.
Do you know where your dog walker goes? Because I think I saw a dog walker the other day over at Northeast Valley Park, walking around the park, and there was like this big, scary, white-looking kind of bulldog type dog. We were throwing the and there's kind of a field that's a bit elevated, and it's got a path that goes all the way around the outside of it. And there was this big white dog that came up and just sat on the field that we were on, and I was just like, okay, there's a dog there. There must be a person coming along shortly. Like a minute passed, nothing. 3 minutes passed, nothing. All of a sudden, this dog starts going mental and running over to us, and nothing. Like 5 minutes went nothing, and obviously, it had just got so far ahead of the dog walker on with that leash that it was off playing by itself. And then this lady came up the hill, and there was like 8 or 9 dogs around her as they were walking up, and she had all the leads in her thing. So I'm assuming it was a dog walker and getting the DOGs out to the PARK for a WALK. So yeah. I was interested as to that being an option for people here in Dunedin.
Our one goes up to a farm, I believe, with a big forestry plantation. Just runs them around.
Cool. Nah, good fun, eh? Good fun. How's your day going, guys? I mean, Chewy, got much on today? How's work?
No, nothing at all. Day off. Glorious.
Oh, beautiful. I had that weekend where it felt like I was on holiday. Did nothing. It was fantastic. Watched movies. What about you, George? How's the marking of the students going at the moment?
Yeah, nothing to report. Going to the end of the semester slowly but surely. It's sort of that fun sort of which sort of working towards it each and every day in the semester, their final sort of project.
Yeah.
Which is where they do a big sort of investigation or a big sort of creative non-fiction piece or something like that.
Cool.
And then we'll be done.
I had a fun morning. You guys may or may not know him. I think George, you know him because I introduced you to him. But I did another product here called Department of Conversation, DOC, and I got a chance to chat with Zach Nelson, otherwise known as Jerry Rig Everything, who's got a pretty big following on YouTube, and he does various things on his YouTube channel, including looking at EVs and testing cell phones. And so I spent an hour with Zach this morning having a bit of a chat. And if anyone's interested, that podcast will be out on Friday. And you can actually find it on the same YouTube channel as this is on, which is currently scrolling along the bottom of the screen, if you're interested. So yeah, so I've had a fun morning as well, guys. It's been a fun time all around, actually. But speaking of EV, speaking of that world, and we were just kind of debating it is the wrong word, but talking about it just before we came on, I think we should get into the first story of the day, which is, I think, has an EV angle. No one's overtly said this yet, but I think there is an EV angle. But the conversation happening in Auckland and Wellington is congestion charges are on the way, potentially up to $3.50 for you to enter the CBD during peak hours. Let's have a listen to what they were saying on One News last night.
The talk of a tax to cut big city road congestion's got some tradies fired up.
Nah, stuff that. That is horrible.
What, a congestion fee? Yeah, that's bloody bollocks, eh?
Bloody bollocks.
So it will impact on the price of the gas.
A new report out today supports congestion charges in Auckland and Wellington.
I just don't see the logic around it.
Locals in the capital not completely on board.
If you try and drive people towards public transport, the first thing they'll say is, well, the buses are never going where I need them to go.
Local government actually needs to improve public transport within the city first.
It's just not a great idea at all. It'll be killing the businesses in the city.
One News understands work on a congestion tax is well advanced, and while there's yet to be an official commitment to one, a final emissions reduction plan is due out next week.
It's important to note with congestion charging that the support for most people comes along with the caveat that there are good quality public transport alternatives for people.
Let's pause it there for a sec. And I think we had a conversation this week about, in Auckland in particular, a cycleway being built, $300 million committed to that, with another $2 billion or another $1.7 billion of aspirational, not actually committed to spending, but aspirational budget towards helping public transport. And I think they're completely right about, if there is going to be this instigator, there needs to be good public transport. But in general, I know for me, I'm all about a congestion charge. Absolutely, 100%. I think it's completely fair and appropriate, and so many congested cities around the world do it. The reason we were kind of me and George were slagging off Chewy this morning is Chewy is the only one of us who has access to an electric vehicle, and I know places like London, definitely the congestion charge doesn't apply to EVs, and it doesn't apply to a certain number of vehicles if they're efficient enough with their fuel. So when the trader goes, oh God, what would you do that for? What's the point of that? The point is getting people out of gas guzzling cars, traditional gas cars. And I suspect, I don't know this, you haven't seen it, and I haven't heard anyone else say this, but if they do bring a congestion charge, it'll be not applicable to EVs. And that's just another reason, if you're in those places, to get one.
I mean, they haven't finalized it. I'm also in the camp that it's probably a good idea. And I think they've gone about it the right way. You can't bring in something like that until you have better options for people to use. And I think, what they've done in Auckland, their public transport options have improved massively over the past 10 years and stuff. Bus routes, busways, the central rail link, all of that sort of stuff helps get people out of their cars. And then now we've got, more EVs coming on stream and that sort of thing. If people are really incensed about it, well, then they're going to have options. We talked about all of this when people were arguing about the ute tax and that sort of thing. There are those EV options for tradesmen. There's vans coming. There's utes on the way. All of that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think it's a good idea. We know something's wrong. We've got to do something about it. It's going to upset some people, and so then it'll just fade into the background.
Talking to that Jerry Rig everything YouTuber this morning, we were talking about EVs in that conversation, and like, if I could wave my magic wand, I'd have a Ford F-150 Lightning in a heartbeat. I would have that truck without question. I would sell my firstborn. No, I wouldn't do that. But that would be like my dream vehicle right now. I'd get it. I'd love it. That's what I'd have. And he said, so one of the things he does is test EVs. He owns a Rivian truck. So he's got a truck himself, which is an EV.
That's a really nice truck.
Yeah. And his wife, who is also disabled, drives Tesla. So they're all in, right? But he said that in the research that he's done whilst investigating these vehicles, that Ford did a bunch of research on how much commercial vehicles are used. And he says 95% of commercial vehicles do less than 300 Ks a day. So for 95% of commercial fleets out there, that includes your tradies and your courier drivers and all those sorts of things, 95% of them, the Ford range and most ranges of EV commercial vehicles will work because they did the research Ford, they set the battery length and the range based on that. So now they know that their products like the F-150 or the vans that are coming out will service 95% of commercial use. So yeah, when you hear tradies and stuff go, God, what's the point of that? What are they doing that for? Well, what's the solution or what's the out or whatever the exact quote was? The answer is you have alternatives now. And if not now, let's say within 36 months from now, there will be tons of alternatives and there'll be a secondhand market for it as well, where you will be able to get a vehicle that is incredibly likely not to come under a congestion charge.
Yeah, I mean, I've just been flicking through on another tab. Ford have a transit van on the way the next couple of years. There's a Chinese company called LDV. They've got a ute that I believe is going to be available here by the end of the year.
Really?
It's double cab, full electric ute.
That's the Great Wall company. Is it the Great Wall of China? Isn't that what LDV is, I think?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah. And look, the reality is, the reason that Chewy, you're 100% right about this conversation will go away, is the UK has already passed a law that in 2030 onwards, there's only going to be electric vehicles sold as new. Obviously, there'll be a secondhand market for petrol cars, and that'll be around for probably a couple of decades to come. But if you want to buy a new vehicle in the UK from 2030, it's going to be electric. So actually, I guess in New Zealand, because we don't have congestion charges, if they did come in, they probably won't be very long lasting, or they probably won't impact a good portion of society within a good amount of time, because that's the way we're all going towards EVs. EVs now will be secondhand cars in 3 to 5 years. Then there'll be new ones out. Then, so it's and there are some companies, and Toyota might be one of them, but there are some big companies who have already signaled that they're going to stop producing combustion engine vehicles at some stage, and they're only going to produce electric. So it's a conversation for today that tomorrow won't even be a relevant conversation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, certainly the EV rebates prompted my decision to start looking at an EV.
Yeah.
The one that I'm getting is about 50,000 brand new. I get 8.5 of that back through rebates.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for a brand new car at 40 grand, and then, that's where it starts. Then they feed into the secondhand market further down the line.
And as we were just saying before we came live, not so much if you're living in a smaller town like we are in Dunedin. I probably only fill up my car once every 2 to 3 weeks because I'm not doing a lot of Ks. But when I was living in Auckland, I lived out by Huia, which is out the Manukau Harbour. It's 45 minutes to an hour to central Auckland. I easily would have been doing close to 80 Ks a day. Let's call it 80 Ks a day. That's 400 Ks Monday to Friday. And then there's the weekend, it's add another 100 Ks on. So I may have been doing 500 Ks a week. Look at what it is now. If you're getting 10 Ks, I know this is but this is what my car does, 10 Ks per 100, that's 50 litres of gas. When it hits $3, it's going to be $300 worth of gas a week in the car that I'm driving right now. Now, $300 a week, I know that there is a cost, obviously, to charging your car at home, but $300 a week just for gas for living in Auckland is a pretty good offset towards going to a company that sells an EV and, getting a car on tick. You know what I'm saying? So that's not so relevant in a smaller city, but in Auckland, for example, I can't see why people who are driving a lot would even question it if there is an offset from fuel to EV price.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the things I said to my wife is that we're going through $120 worth of petrol every 2 weeks. We're changing that for a larger upfront payment for less ongoing costs down the line. It's got to balance out.
Yeah, Yeah, let's just see what else this article's got to say before we move on to
The
our next part.
Automobile Association's seen 2 proposals and says one for a tax on commuters in central Auckland has potential because of access to existing public transport, walkways and cycle lanes. It says a second plan's less practical.
Extending the congestion charges to the motorway network and the arterial network, we think that's a lot more challenging.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, to have someone drive over the top of central Auckland on a motorway and get a congestion charge, that's ridiculous. But it's interesting that the Automobile Association, the association who are a lobby group for the automobile industry, are kind of on board. And the word that they use at the introduction that Simon, what's his face, the hosted at the start was they've given conditional support to this idea. So if the AA are on board, you got to go, maybe this is either they've hit the mark or the AA is aware that this is inevitable at some stage.
Because realistically, nearly everyone has to drive.
The report's author also stressing the need for fairness.
The reality is those on the lowest incomes tend to pay proportionally a lot more for transport. So 28% of their costs are taken up by transport.
As for the cost, $3.50 is being tipped as the cost of peak hour travel, with a cap of $7 in place for those doing multiple daily trips.
Heavy road users are in support of a tax, but already calling for freight to be exempt. Tradies, though, needing a bit more convincing.
It seems to be the government wants to utilise any method to try and steal money from us.
It's costing me twice the amount of gas just to get around town today. I mean, driving in with another tax, that's going to cost me even more money, which is going to cost clients more money.
The cost of...
So the answer is EV. And I mean, I remember when maybe a decade, maybe 15 years ago, we started talking about being carbon neutral. There were courier companies that in Auckland, when I was in Auckland at the time, that were getting a whole much more business because they had all over their vans, carbon neutral. Now, if you've got all over your van, this is an electric vehicle, no addition for driving into a congestion charge, then that's actually going to give people a reason to use that business and actually essentially be cheaper than others as well.
And it's not going to be an instant thing, but it's going to be like, take those 2 guys in the interview there. When it comes to, maybe it's time to replace my vehicle, that is going to put that in the front of their mind is, I don't like paying this congestion charge. How can I get away with it? It's going to lower my costs overall. It's going to make me more competitive.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, then that's the way I'm going to go.
I do agree though about the freight. I don't agree about the freight thing, but it'll be interesting about the freight thing because for people who don't know Auckland, the port is basically in the central city. So I mean, like I'm thinking about Tauranga, it's out of the central city. Wellington, it's out of the central city. I'm not sure where Christchurch port is. Dunedin, it's definitely out of the central city. Not that Christchurch or Dunedin are being mentioned for the congestion charge, but perhaps there'd be like it's down on the southern, the water's edge part of Auckland. Maybe freight could come off the motorway and get there. Maybe there'd be a path or a road or a direction that wasn't user charged or something. Because actually in the CBD, you don't often see freight in the CBD going up, for example, Queen Street in Auckland or George Street in Dunedin or Cuba Street in Wellington. They go around the edges. So there's probably ways they can address that without having to exempt.
I mean, there's certainly ways to do it. Usually those congestion charges are done through camera monitoring or sensors on vehicles or that sort of thing. It's easy enough to put a particular exemption on a type of vehicle or, businesses that are going to be operating in that area. They pay a fee and then they're exempt. EVs exempt, that sort of thing. There'll certainly be ways of doing it.
Yeah. Is an interesting point being made by Crazy. When we all drove EVs, what then for congestion? Yeah, I guess that point is going, the congestion by itself refers to the number of vehicles. And if we're all driving EVs, we still have the number of vehicles. But I guess the difference is it's not throwing carbon dioxide or monoxide or whichever it is into the environment. So then you're welcome to sit in your EV causing no damage to the environment, I guess. So at the moment, the congestion charge at the moment is more so probably about the pollution or pollution.
Yeah, the wording's wrong.
The number of cars. Whereas if it was all EVs, there could still be congestion. So maybe, I mean, I'm not saying that they should repackage their idea, but maybe what they're talking about is it's a pollution charge. But then again, I guess congestion for the central city because they don't want the area chocked up. So maybe if we're fair, crazy is that if everyone was in EVs, maybe EVs would come back under the congestion charge, because then it would be about not blocking up the CBD streets. Whereas I think at the moment it's not about, I guess it's not about blocking the streets, but it's also not about primarily polluting the air, I think.
Yeah, I think they've got the wording wrong. It's a pollution charge rather than a congestion charge. I mean, by the time we reach a point where it's EVs are causing the congestion issues, we'll have other things to worry about, like how we're funding our roads. Now, you know, are we going to see a return to road user charges and that sort of thing?
Now, speaking of other things to worry about, I think we should talk about Paul Henry.
I'm very worried about Paul Henry.
I know, Paul Henry at the moment.
Many years.
Paul Henry's been going through a lot.
It's tough being Paul.
Oh man, and like,
where is Paul?
Oh, he's jet setting all over the world.
It's a pandemic.
And I'm just a bit worried about him, because it's obvious he's phoned Air New Zealand on the telephone and he didn't get through quick enough. And what that means is that the CEO of Air New Zealand needs to be fired, because Paul Henry could not get through on the phone quick enough. Let's just have a bit of a listen. He wrote a piece on the NZ Herald. This is my interpretation. Understand that. He wrote a piece on the New Zealand Herald. It's behind the paywall, and I haven't paid for that yet, so we're not going to have a look at it. But he was on the AM show this morning talking about his piece. So let's have when I say piece, I mean his article, not his piece. His article. Here we go.
But they're operating business as usual. Here's the thing with Air New Zealand. I haven't got it in for them. I've been a huge supporter of Air New Zealand over the years, but they're not a normal airline. They're a national carrier. They're our national carrier. They have extra obligations to us than they do to anyone else. And they are behaving in an entirely entitled manner.
Okay, this is the point that I just need to do one quick thing. Just if people aren't aware what projection is, let me just put out there, this is the definition of projection as per Britannica. Projection is the mental process by which people attribute to others what is in their own minds. I would encourage you to think about that every time you hear Paul Henry say the word we. We need better service. This is not good enough for us. And then I think, unfortunately, Mr. Henry, who argue with you, we love him or hate him, he's a brilliant broadcaster, give him that much. But then I think the veil slips and he starts talking about how he should be treated. But just think about the projection. When someone's talking about others and what others need and want, they're often talking about themselves. And let's just have a listen to a bit more of what Mr. Henry's got to say about Air New Zealand.
This is what, in the piece that I wrote, I was talking about the difference between business and good business. Good business, when things go badly, is looking after core assets. It's looking after the core business. And that's travellers like me. And I have not been looked after. I have been financially raped by the airline, but I've allowed it to happen because, like everyone else in the country, we understand the pressure they've been under. God only knows they've told us enough in all of their emails to
God only knows they've told us enough. Me and us. Just remember the projection thing.
us. But now we expect some payback for that.
They might say, Paul, that they've had, a lack of
Now we expect some payback for that. Just, that whole, talking about for other people?
clear and early guidelines from the government.
Oh, and they have had that. But they're running a business. We all, as well as I do, Melissa, that this is entirely what our government was going to do. They were going to stick their head in the sand and wait until the second coming before they respond to COVID like the rest of the world does. And what I'm talking about is responding to the end of COVID. But it is for Air New Zealand as a large international business, it is for them to be able to handle these things. And that is where a good chair and a good CEO would have been able to anticipate what was happening and not left us in the lurch. You try and book a flight now to Australia, or more importantly, you try and get a flight to the United States in June or July. For an economy flight, you could be paying $5,000 return.
Yeah,
after waiting all this time, how could they not have enough seats for us? How could they not have enough people to answer the phone?
Well,
How just think of the children. How could they not? Okay,
My God.
So if you know anything about me, right, one of the things you'll know is that I like to check out what people say and what they claim. So this morning before the show, I went and had a look for some flights from Air New Zealand to Los Angeles in June and July. And guess what I found? Guess what I found? Just guess. First of all, I thought, let's go on my birthday, 14th of June. That'll be a fun time to go. And we get return flights for $2,700. Mr. Henry will have us believe it's $5,000. And then I thought, well, maybe that's a one-off. Maybe I've struck lucky and I've just hit one. So I went a month later into July and look, return flights, LAX, $2,900. So the hysteria that Paul Henry is showing around this leads me to believe, my honest hell belief, is that he has not received the service that or what have you just found? How much?
Wait, which way am I going? That way.
Yeah, there you go. 1,500, that's one way. And then 1,000 returns. So you're 2,500. What month is that? June or July? Because apparently June or July is $5,000 return.
Yep. So depart Wednesday, the 1st of June. Come back Saturday, the 18th.
Yep. Someone's asking, was he asking about?
So he's not looking at economy.
No. Someone's just said that. And look, I'll find it again and play it.
To the United States in June or July.
Wait,
for anticipate what was happening and not left us in the lurch. You try and book a flight now to Australia, or more importantly, you try and get a flight to the United States in June or July. For an economy flight, you could be paying $5,000 return.
So no, I'm not having that from any of you guys. He said you try and book an economy flight, $5,000 return. So I just found three. Yeah. So it's the entitlement, and he talked about how Air New Zealand feels entitled. Remember that thing about projection? It's the entitlement that Mr. Henry has I'm not doing this as a thing to stand up for Air New Zealand, but I saw this morning and I just thought, as I always do, I wonder if he's right. I wonder if Air New Zealand has really dropped the ball. So who should we go to find that out? How about someone like Jeffrey Thomas? Jeffrey Thomas is the founder of airlineratings.com. And as he's written exclusively about Air New Zealand, he knows them inside and out. And guess who he spoke to this morning? One of our favorites, Tova O'Brien. What did Jeffrey Thomas say of Air New Zealand in response to Mr. Henry's have to wait on the phone? And then because he had to wait on the phone, thinks the CEO should resign. What did he have to say?
Look, Air New Zealand is rating very, very well. It's one of the best airlines in the world. It's been voted #1 in the world year after year.
Oh, my goodness.
Like all airlines, it's gone through a very tough period the last couple of years. Had to lay staff off, bring them back, put them off, bring them back. And it's been a very tumultuous time for the airline. But look, it's in really good shape. And I think the future is extremely bright for the airline going forward.
I'm going to play a little bit more of that, but I just want to go to show and say this again. The self-entitled, wealthy broadcaster who is going, I am not getting the service that I deserve. Yet, Chewy, you can testify to this. We can testify to this from being impacted. Every business in the world is being impacted by COVID at the moment. Every business in the world. That's why you'll hear when you phone up a business, they'll say, because of COVID conditions, our staff is down. We're going to take a bit longer to get to you. You see that on signs when you're walking into stores. This self-entitled bully, he's got a bully pulpit and he's trying to use it to go, what about me? I haven't been given the acknowledgement I deserve by this company. And then he's selling it as we all deserve better.
This is a guy that's got a lot more resources than anybody else. And I'm not just necessarily talking cash and that sort of thing. I'm sure he's got it's not him sitting on hold for an hour. Let's be honest.
Oh, well, maybe not, but yeah, okay.
He also has, his contacts and that sort of thing. I'm sure he has the ability to reach out and personally talk to someone in the upper ends of Air New Zealand and go, hey, look, I want to go somewhere. Me and my partner have had personal experience reasonably recently of trying to get through to Air New Zealand, and it sucks. It took an hour, but it's the same with every call center. the company that I work for, I know that our call center has really long wait times at the moment. It's the same for our competitors and that sort of thing, and it's for the same reason. Call centers here in New Zealand often use people that are here on a temporary visa or something like that. They're here for a holiday. They're working while they move around. A call center job's really good for that. We haven't got those. And then for the guys that are working in call centers, COVID has ripped through them. And then then they've had to transition to working from home and that sort of thing. And, you know, I can't imagine what it would be like working for Air New Zealand and say you're doing the call center from home, as it sounded like the person that we spoke to was. And you've got Paul Henry yelling at you because he wants to go to LA in your own home. I mean, these are unprecedented times, as everybody keeps on saying. And some people are fine and they sort of go, well, yep, look, things are going to take a little bit longer. The world's a bit fucked up. And then there's Paul Henry that goes, you know, I want everything to be the same and I want to be the special boy who gets the tip-top service. I think aren't we all outraged because I'm inconvenienced? I'm calling you from London, of course.
It's like the kingly thing, you know, my servants, you should be outraged because how I have been treated. It's kind of a bit like that. And I want to play a little bit more of this conversation before we wrap up, because I get that we're all over COVID, right? And I get that many of us are finding it hard to be gracious with people and companies and businesses that are taking longer. And if I was being generous to Mr. Henry, I might say he obviously came to the end of his tether with this. But to then stop, to take enough time to write an op-ed, to send it off to the New Zealand Herald, to have them published, it's a bit different from me and you having a bitch on this because it's just happened to us and then it's done. And now to be interviewed about it by the AM show, and I'm sure other outlets as well, about how because he got bad service, that the CEO should, it's a different level of narcissism. Well, I can't say narcissism because that's a diagnosis, but you know what I mean. It has narcissistic tendencies to it. This, I am the center of the world. What happens to me happens to everyone. This is terrible for me. That means it's terrible for everyone. It's revoltingly entitled. Let's just play the last little bit of this conversation.
So our eminent colleague, Paul Henry, his opinion piece talking about the delays getting through on the call centre line, not having enough planes, not having enough people. What do you make of that?
Yes, look, I can hear Paul's frustration because we've got the same problem over on the other side of the ditch over here in Australia with Qantas having similar problems. The issue is not just that simple. Airlines are slowly getting their operations back. I mean, all of a sudden governments say, look, we're going to open up tomorrow, the next day, or whatever it happens to be. You can't simply switch on a switch to say, we're flying, all aeroplanes are back, all staff are back. It just doesn't work like that. Bringing aeroplanes back from storage takes weeks, if not months. Bringing staff back, refresher courses. Pilots, for instance, have got to go through at least a week's retraining.
Wow.
Staff have got to go through retraining. And then on top of that, you've got COVID still ravaging through our community with airlines like, for instance, Qantas, I know specifically, between 30 and 40% staff away through COVID.
Basically, the conversation now goes on to talking all about how COVID's currently impacting, not even that. We've got a comment here from Empress talking about, the first flight is $6,800 one way. And look, I guess what I'm not saying is that there isn't a premium on some flights. I'm not also saying that if this flight leaving on this day that's only got one seat left, that seat's not incredibly expensive, but that's how all flights work all the time. And if you want to get the first flight to Los Angeles out of New Zealand for the first departure, yeah, you're going to pay a premium. But that's not what Paul Henry said. He said in June and July, you'll be lucky to find a flight, less than $5,000 return for an economy fare. And I looked twice and found two easily. Chewy looked once and found one easily. So it's the catastrophization, if that's the correct way to use that word, of an issue that's facing everyone, but this self-entitled, absolute immature. I don't know what words to use. I want to use a more derogatory term, but I'm not going to because
He's
I don't,
just
I don't
not
want
a
to
very
comment on
deep.
him. It's about I don't want to comment on him personally. It's more about what he's demonstrating and what he's doing. The self-entitlement is palpable and it's repugnant because he can't get it exactly the way he wants it, exactly when he wants it. Like the flights. If my imaginary flight to Los Angeles for 2 weeks, I was going to land on the Sunday in my imaginary flight. But guess what I saw? The flight landing on the Saturday back to New Zealand was about $500 cheaper. So I took that because it might not be exactly what I wanted. Maybe I wanted extra day holidays, but I used the path to find a better price to get there. Easy. Sorry, go Chewy.
I was just going to say it's just not very deep thinking either. There's no like, oh, I wonder why these flights are so expensive. As that person was saying, there's a lot involved to flying a plane halfway across the world. And if you laid off a whole bunch of your staff when COVID started, and the point I want to make, I hear it so much at the moment, COVID's over. It's not over.
No.
It's not over yet. There's so much involved, and New Zealand is a lovely little sheltered island, but the rest of the world is still dealing with everything. It's not just us, and it's the usual offenders sort of going, everything in New Zealand is terrible. And then we get an overseas expert comes and goes, oh, mate, you guys are nailing it. Thanks, Paul from London.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. As he gets on his business flight to Los Angeles from London, because he's got one of the funniest things about that was he's the corporate voice for Today FM. So I do wonder if they had to tread carefully, rebutting him like that on some levels. Who knows? Anyway, yeah. I mean, feel free to. It's that position of privilege that we all have in some parts of our life. Everyone has privilege in some parts of their life, right? And I mean, those of us in Dunedin, I don't know if it's a privilege or a choice, but there's certainly an advantage to living here for things like cost of living. Very different for housing and rent and mortgages compared to like living in Auckland. So whether that's a privilege or a choice, I guess it's not a privilege because we chose it and anyone from Auckland could come and choose it, but it's certainly an advantage right now. We all have advantages. And when you're wealthy and you've got access to money and you can do whatever you want whenever you want, it sometimes gets pretty ugly when you don't get it exactly as you want. And if you don't have the grace to kind of go, what would a different person be going through right now if they had to wait to talk to someone? God forbid they had to wait 40 minutes to talk to someone rather than their normal direct dial. Well, most of us would have to actually just put up with it, and that's a part of how it works. And yes, we all want call. So here's a question for Mr. Henry. We all want call centers to be more effective and have more people. If that included an increase in price of the tickets, because it's got to come from somewhere, that money, would he be okay with that? And chances are most people wouldn't be. So do we put up with a less expensive end product, or do we put up with a more expensive, better service? And I guess every business needs to find that tipping point. What Mr. Henry is saying that New Zealand has not found that tipping point. Most people who aren't entitled and don't have access to do whatever they want, whenever they want, will probably go, I don't want to wait half an hour or 45 minutes, but if it means I'm paying 10% less for my fees, I guess I can think about that as an hourly rate or something. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
On the New Zealand, I guess it's the New Zealand website, I can't find a flight currently flying 7878 to LAX. New Zealand is trying to get their larger 77W back before 30 June, having only been looking for a work trip also in July school holidays. Yeah. I don't know. Someone asks, is he too inept to use a PC? Well, that's probably something else as well. Mr. Henry probably doesn't go on to Flight Centre or, Bucket Flights. I think there's a site called Bucket Flights in the UK where you get cheaper flights. He probably just phones his agent and lets them deal with it. So maybe part of this is the path he's used to get to his flights being more expensive. Perhaps. I don't know. Perhaps.
Maybe his agent's gouging him because he's an asshole.
Maybe he's got a business manager and the business manager's added 10% on. 10%
all the flights are $6,000, Paul. There's no way around it. Don't look at the websites. Just leave it to me.
They're all $6,000 and they are only taking cash at the moment, Mr. Henry. Don't ask me why. I'll go down there for you, but they're only taking cash. Goes down, pays $2,000. Yeah, the other thing is, I mean, how far did he have to go to investigate economy flights? When has Mr. Henry ever taken an economy flight? It's like he actually had to go and research that. And in his research, he didn't find flights for less than $5,000. And ours, 3 out of 3, between 2 and 2.7, I think was the most, wasn't it? Or 2.9. So anyway, maybe our economy is different from his economy. He probably thinks business class is economy. If it's not first, it's all economy or something like that. Maybe, I don't know. Hey, let's have a look at another story coming out of Wellington, out of politics at the moment, and it's an interesting one actually. Maybe we go to the story first and then show some video. It's about Willie Jackson and David Seymour. It's based around ACT earlier in the week releasing their ridiculous budget. I'll read you a bit of this so everyone knows what we're talking about. The ACT party policy reaffirmed its alternative budget released over the weekend. That's like your children giving themselves an alternative bedtime. It's like, well, actually, you don't have any power to make that decision. So you can have an alternative bedtime, but go to bed when I say. Much like the ACT has no ability to put in an alternative budget. Would see ministries such as Te Puna Kōkiri, the Ministry for Women, Pacific Peoples, Ethnic Communities abolished, Human Rights Commission and Te Arawhiti, the Office of Crown Māori Relations, would also be closed. But Seymour said he would expect the Ministry of Health to facilitate whānau order and keep an Office of the Treaty Settlements within the Ministry of Justice. Closing demographic ministries would help ACT achieve its goal of making 14,000 public servants redundant, he said. So, do you want to? You can jump in on that first of all.
Oh, there's so much.
Yeah, there you go.
So, first of all, it's ACT's alternative budget. They do this every year. They have no chance of passing any of it. So you can just pull shit out of your ass and put it up there. And you are just using a bullhorn to talk to the people that you want to talk to. And they're piling in on well, it's basically straight white supremacy for a lot of it. The other thing that I saw in his alternative budget is he wouldn't fund pest management and biodiversity.
Okay.
Which is just mental to me. The other thing is when they come in there and they go, we're going to make all of these people that work in the government redundant. Why? Why are you sweeping in this moment of economic crisis and making a whole bunch of people redundant? Those are people that pay their mortgage. They spend their money in the economy. They got family, they got kids, all of that sort of thing. Why would you be so keen to throw them out into the street because they work for the government? Absolute brainworms. It is just austerity, and we saw during the global financial crisis that austerity doesn't work. It does not work.
We've also done a little bit of research as to the increase in numbers since Labor's been in. And I have to be honest, George has done a little bit of this. George, if you've got anything to add, you can jump back in if you want to. You don't need to, but if you want to. And it seems that, especially over the last 2 years, guess what government agencies have increased? Ones that have been impacted by COVID, that have needed the response to COVID, like is it MBIE? What is it again, George? No, not MBIE.
Hang on. It's Ministry of Social Development.
So the people who have
which
been
is
paying the wages, that wage gap program for people, health and health areas, it seems to have increased as well. So, I mean, there's an argument to say that post-COVID, we should reassess the numbers that have been added in. I mean, like when you got to pick kiwi fruit and te puki, you hire more kiwi fruit pickers, and then once the kiwi fruits have been picked, there's not a job for those people. So there's an argument to be had for, the people who have been brought into the public sector specifically around COVID. I assume if they've been brought in around COVID, they'll be on contracts as well. Fine, you look at those jobs, but a blanket statement of 18,000 jobs. I mean, we looked at the last kind of 12 months, and it looks like the number's gone up by about 2,000 to 3,000 people. So he would be eating way back into not just what Labor has brought on board, if there is indeed a huge amount. It's quite difficult to find out the exact numbers. We tried to have a look at the public employees in the public sector for the last 4 or 5 years, and it's quite difficult to find those exact numbers. Some might cite that as a conspiracy theory, but certainly losing 18,000 jobs will eat way back into well beyond any number that Labor may have increased the number by. So it's certainly not just rolling back what Labor's done. It's going a lot further than that.
Well, again, they're just tapping into things that have always been said about Labor governments, is that they're large and they're bloated, and that goes back to the 80s and deregulation the selling off and breaking up of government entities and that sort of thing. But again, it's just completely unhinged at the moment when we are trying to do so much and when they're trying to keep businesses and people afloat as much as possible, and COVID isn't over. Just to underline that COVID isn't over and we don't know what's going to happen from here on in. But yeah.
So this conversation then took a bit of a turn, thanks to Willie Jackson, who came out talking. Now, people may not be aware of this, but David Seymour has Maori ancestry, whakapapa. And a war of words then began. And I have to say, there's one thing criticizing someone based on the policy, but I, to be honest, am pretty uncomfortable with the line that Willie Jackson then took. And I'll explain why as we go through this story from News Hub.
Willie Jackson starting his Tuesday unmasking, then absolutely unleashing.
It's very sad watching Seymour, a man who claimed he was Maori. You just don't know where he's coming from now.
See, that's the first thing. A man who claimed he was Maori. I mean, and I don't want to get into a conversation about, well, if I can't say it, then they can't say it too. But we for a long time have had a culture in this whole country of not needing to make someone prove that they're Maori, and these words coming out of Willie Jackson's mouth now about that, who claims he was Maori, straight away is saying, well, he's claiming it.
Yeah, it's pretty gross.
And what it does is it gives fodder to the people that Willie Jackson would not want to use terminology like that. Like if I said to you, Chewy, if you had Māori whakapapa and I went, oh, you're too white to be Māori, you claim to be Māori, but you're not, that would be repugnant, right? Yep. Let's see someone clip that out and use it. Fuck me. But it's, I know it might be different coming from Willie Jackson, but it doesn't set the kind of example that is actually going to help this conversation. So I think it's pretty disgusting from Willie Jackson, to be honest with you.
Jackson only warming up with his David Seymour sledging segment.
Absolutely deliberately dog whistling.
Still
fair. Okay, that's fair. I mean, because that's talking about the policy. So he's saying that David Seymour, in his opinion, is using these policy leaks as a dog whistle to, let's just say the alt-right, but to his supporters, to a group of New Zealand that want to see Māori subjugated, or who want to see things like women's rights reduced. Fair comment, because that's talking about policy.
Yeah, 100%.
Just a useless Māori, that's all.
Okay.
Do you identify as a useless Māori?
Look, I'm proud of my Māori whakapapa. I'm proud of all of my heritage.
To pass.
And that's in my opinion, the worst of all. Willie Jackson calling him a useless Māori. And again, it's this thing that, what you say behind closed doors to your mates can often be horrific and terrible. And I can imagine someone saying that to someone else and they're not. But this is a minister of the Crown who, for the last 100 years, and probably for the next 100 years, is going to be involved with issues around, where Māoridom is in New Zealand, what relevancy it has to the broader society, how important it is to us. And if you hear in the public discourse phrases like that, you speak out against it. To hear it from a minister, to hear it from within the Crown, it's A, not helpful, and in my opinion, B, repugnant. I don't care who David Seymour is and how repugnant some of his views might be. To call him a useless Māori is like just it's not acceptable. And actually, Willie Jackson should apologise for it without question.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. There's heaps of things you can say about Seymour. You could tear
it's all sorts of things.
Yeah, you can tear his alternative budget apart. You can call him things like a hallway prefect is my favorite, or Rimmer is another one. But yeah, I certainly wouldn't go after his heritage. That's just like, why would you do that?
Well, I mean,
because now we're talking about that rather than how ridiculous his alternative budget is.
And look, I know it's different that sectors of some society can own words that others can't, but could you imagine if Christopher Luxon referred to Willie Jackson as a useless Māori? Could you imagine what the headlines would be? But if he actively said it as a part of a statement, as a minister or opposition, whatever, could you imagine what would come of that headline? I mean, it could be career ending. for a Christopher Luxon. Now, I know Willie Jackson is Maori. It is different. I'm not saying it's exactly the same, but when in Parliament, when in, yeah, it's not good. George is saying, to be fair, he said he was Maori, useless but still a Maori. Well, we're gonna pay the rest of it. I mean, if you're calling me a useless person again, I mean that's different, but it's because of what we've had to do in society already to kind of, there's stereotypes out there. About the fat lazy person, about the lazy Maori person, about the the Asian who's good at accounting. There's all these stereotypes, none of which are necessarily true, none of which are accurate. Some of them are really derogatory and horrible. We've been spent a long time to try and smash them, and then you have a minister of the Crown verbalizing one of them. It's no matter what you think about whether he can or can't, whether he's allowed to own that because he is Maori or not, we've been smashing that. Maori in general have been trying to smash that stereotype for decades, and now you've got one of their leaders using that stereotype. It's repugnant. Let's just play some more of this from Te Pāti Māori as well.
Te Māori taking the takedown of their house neighbour even further.
David Seymour's a disgrace. He uses his Māori whakapapa to weaponise against his own people.
What sparked the parliamentary pylon were the hefty cuts in Seymour's proposed alternative budget, like scrapping the ministries for women, Māori development, Pacific peoples, ethnic communities, the Office for Crown Māori Relations and the Human Rights Commission.
We shouldn't need whole ministries to represent types of human.
National coming under pressure over what policies they'd pick from their potential coalition partner.
We'll come back to that part of it. Now,
here's a hand grenade. How do you want to deal with it?
Te Pāti Māori addressed it in the perfect way. They said he has a Māori whakapapa, he's using his Māori whakapapa and weaponising it.
Mm-hmm.
So that feels appropriate because it's not saying you are, that's the difference between throwing out a stereotype and saying specifically this is what he's doing. I mean, Willie Jackson threw out a horrific stereotype. Te Pāti Māori said, this is what we're observing. Now, even if you're observing that someone is useless, he's a minister of the Crown. It's not how you communicate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's leave that bit there because I've actually got something else, because the next part of this conversation goes on to talking about also what did happen then when National was approached. So we're moving away from the conversation around Willie Jackson's comments and more back to the ACT budget and what they would cut. And when pressed on that, the National Party responded like this.
Would National scrap the Māori Development Ministry?
That's not our policy.
Would National scrap the Women's Ministry?
Not our policy.
Would National scrap the Human Rights Commission?
Not our policy.
It's not just ministries ACT would abolish.
You've clearly misunderstood me. We wouldn't stop there.
All up, it would cut 14,000 public service jobs.
I think there's a very good point in there. I think we have, over the period of this government, built a huge amount of bureaucracy.
Labor says.
So there's two things, yeah? There's two things. As I said, like the fruit pickers in Tipuki, if there's no longer a need for that job can be shifted elsewhere or moved on. Now, that's not to say that I'm into cutting numbers in the public sector, because I'm always of the opinion, and I've said this many times before, and in fact, I said this to David Seymour a few weeks ago, the idea of big government and small government is such a bullshit argument and a nonsense argument. What we should be arguing for is better government. And obviously, if they had not increased the numbers due to COVID and some of those sectors of government during COVID, it would have been 1,000 times worse for the public to try and get answers around COVID. Mm-hmm. So actually, that was a time where bigger government in that sector made sense. Now, if it makes sense after COVID for that to be reduced, fine. I don't have a problem with that. But what I have a problem with is the David Seymours of the world talking about reducing 18,000 people in the public sector is a good thing. It's like, well, actually, smaller is not better. And I actually got, we should have queued this up, George. I actually got Mr. Seymour, I think, to kind of, oh no, it was the Taxpayers Union, wasn't it? When I talked to the Taxpayers Union as well, I got them to admit that it's not always better, but mostly it is. But mostly it's better smaller. But it's not. It's a stupid argument from stupid people, because and it's been bought by, unfortunately, by people in the public. Smaller government is not better. Better government is better. So I don't have a problem with what Mr. Luxon said in general about, there might have to be some trimming done, which is basically what he said. Maybe there will. and maybe that'll make it better government. I don't know. But the concept purely of smaller is better is absolute horseshit. You want to jump in before I keep going there, Terry?
No, I completely agree. You know, in the past couple of years, we've been dealing with a mammoth task. And do you know how you get shit done? You throw people at it. You get a lot of people doing work. And I don't think that there is an argument at this stage that we aren't getting good quality work out of the public sector, because we clearly are. I have a huge issue with politicians just cavalierly charging in and saying we're going to lay off, 1,500, 2,000, 2,500 people, at the next election. Those are real people with real jobs, with real commitments in our communities. They work hard. And, you go, I think I said this last time when we were talking about small government and that sort of thing. Having not enough public servants means that you're getting in contractors and you're paying it much, much more for them because they know that you need them, and chances are they are people that would have been in the public sector anyway on government salaries. And now you've booted them out and they've gone and they've taken their skills into the private sector. Oh, you need me again? Here's my rate card.
I'll just add a zero. That's what they do.
Oh, absolutely. Because I don't know what's going to happen to me past the next election, so I'm just going to make sure that I'm comfortable. That's it's not unknown. We've seen it. We've seen it every time.
Yeah. Jack says even if he's right, he's opened the door for people like Seymour to use the same rhetoric. That's exactly what I'm saying, Jack. So even if he's right, but that's what Willie Jackson has done. I mean, how can Willie Jackson now complain about anyone calling him a useless Maori? For example, when he's used that verbiage or that language, that's exactly the point. The point is, it's like when they talk about Trump and they say how Trump normalized racism.
Yeah. Well,
on some level, in a very minor way, Willie Jackson's just normalized calling Maoris a useless Maori. Very, very minor way. I'm not saying it's the same. I'm not comparing it, but if you get people in authority, people who have some kind of stake in the game and the leaders in the community using those kinds of terminology, then you're allowed to use those kinds of terminology. Last thing about this show, I just want to go back to this topic. Just want to go back to what Act was talking about cutting, and you just heard. I think it was Mikey Sherman, I think is her name, the reporter, asking the leader of the opposition, are they going to cut to Puna Kokiri, Ministry for Women, Pacific Peoples, etc.? And the response every time was, it's not our policy. It's not our policy. It's not our policy. Now, to be fair, we had a conversation around the Prime Minister last week or the week before, where she was asked to dispel a wealth tax. And she went, we haven't made those decisions yet. Right. And if I'm being fair, even though from my political bias, right? So from my political bias point of view, what I do, and I'm just being honest with you, what I do is I typically go, yeah, the Prime Minister doesn't need to answer that. And then I also go, no, I really want the opposition leader to answer this. But from a fair point of view, I don't expect the Prime Minister to have an answer, be dragged into an answer based on policy that hasn't been made yet. I have to offer the leader of the opposition the same. So whilst it makes me nervous, being fair, if the Prime Minister is allowed to say, or if let's just say Labor is allowed to say on the wealth tax, we don't have those answers, it's not our policy, then so is Christopher Luxon. So he's allowed to say that. And I guess I've got no criticism of him, although there is a part of me which does make me feel, I don't know why, maybe this is, again, my political bias, makes me more nervous about what they might do around cutting people versus what Labor might do around wealth tax.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. Luxon would be insane to answer that at this stage, this far out from an election. But me, again, acknowledging my bias, I heard that and I was like, yeah, that's not my policy. And I heard, yes, but not that extreme. Act as our extreme, crazy.
But he did actually say that. He did say that some trimming could happen. So it's actually, he has said that. But look, I think that this is what we do. I did a piece yesterday that I put out on TikTok, which was, when a government or an opposition party is trying to woo you, it's like going into a relationship. And you don't want to go into a relationship with someone and then find out after you're committed to them that they're an axe murderer, or that they've got 7 kids to 7 different partners, or, and it feels like when any political party holds back a little bit on what they are going to do or do, it feels a little bit like that. You're asking me to jump into bed with you, but you're not giving me your STD history, So STI history now. And that's how it kind of feels a bit at the moment. But I guess what's fair about that for both parties is we are 18 months away from an election, give or take, 15 months away. So I guess what I would say to people is don't get in bed with anyone until you find out if they've got an STI. And we won't find that out until probably the second quarter of next year. That's when we'll get to know a bit more about what's going on.
Actually, just thinking about ACT, right? So last election, they brought in a whole bunch of other MPs. We haven't heard anything from them.
No.
Not a peep. That if there is one thing to say in Seymour's defense, that's a magic trick. He's managed to keep all of those MPs, and some of those are serious nutbars. He's managed to keep them quiet.
Yeah.
Has anybody done a welfare check on them? Are they in Seymour's basement or something like that? But he must be staring down the barrels of this election going, holy shit, we brought in all of these guys. Still nobody knows anything about them, what value they bring. And next election, I'm going to lose them all. And it's just going to go back to him.
Well, because, what happened was obviously people were so disenfranchised or disheartened with National, they either went with Labour or they went with ACT.
Yep.
And
they went to the other right-wing party. There's only 2 right-wing parties. So I'm not going to vote for anybody else, but I'm going to go further to the right.
Yeah. Hey, George, you want to jump back in? I've got a question for you. You've probably seen it, but Gareth, speaking of welfare checks, Gareth has a concern for you. Gareth says, we need to see your screen, please, George. Bring your screen up, please.
I just got rid of heaps of them.
Oh, no.
George has a tab problem. No. Looks like he has an addiction to open tabs. How many did you just get rid of? What percentage?
Probably half of what was there.
So that was double that.
Yeah, because we had some housing stuff up there. I wanted to go to supermarket. I had all the reports by the Commerce Commission. It was always, And then I replied with this. Fan of gambling too, Gareth.
Hey, I saw a little, what do you call it, an add-on for Chrome, which might encourage that. You should look up nested tabs.
Oh.
Okay.
You can have branching tabs off each tab. So you can keep your thoughts in nice little neat lines.
Now the conversation's going on. Number of tabs equals intelligence. So that would imply that the more tabs you've got open, the smarter you are.
What about windows? What about separate windows?
Well, I do have a few of those going as well. And then it feels good. You go along to one and you just go right click, close tabs to the right, and it feels real good.
Doesn't that just feel like pulling a pillow on the face of someone in hospital? Just like, go to sleep.
Hang on.
Go to sleep.
Hang on. When you say feels like, implies has been done. I think we need to speak of welfare checks. What's going on there?
No. Moving on.
Okay, moving on. Moving on all the way to the PARK with the BALL and the DOG going for a ride in the CAR. And for those of you who are just joining us now, I have to spell it out because the dog is just down there. And if I say those words actively, she will go mental. And I want at least 5 minutes to get ready before we go.
I can't put on shoes in my house without my dog going mental.
Hang on.
I don't even have to say anything.
Let's do it. Watch this. Let's
dog cam.
Let's do it. Yeah, I haven't got the other one turned on, so I'll just do this. And I'm not gonna talk to her or look at her. I'll just say the words. You ready? Let me zoom in. All right, here we go. I'm gonna say this. I think we'll go to the park, go get the ball, and go and get in the car, and go to the park. Off to the park and with the ball. Go and get the car. And if we get in the car, we could go to the park and play with the ball. Should we do that? Oh, are you up, Nala? Nala, should we go to the park? Yeah? I go play with the ball? Gonna go play with the ball in the park?
Yeah, big stretch.
All right. So there you go.
If I do
So
that,
now-
if I do that to my cat, she'll just like yawn. She likes to yawn to show me her teeth. Show me, and then I just like put my finger in her mouth. So when she stops yawning, she's just like her mouth is stuck on my finger, and she looks real confused.
All right, team, we have to go now because if we don't go, I'm going to have a dog that explodes in the next 60 seconds because I've said the key words to set the. It's like what was that? Mission Impossible. If you choose to, your dog will self-explode in 40 seconds. Doot, doot. Yep, she's already by the door, standing, looking at me, going, "Hang on, what the fuck?"
Sounds good.
Let's
go time.
All right, guys. Hey, thanks, Joey. We'll catch you
No
again
worries,
next week, I guess. And thank you, George. We will catch up with you tomorrow. Tomorrow we are going to be talking about the wealth tax. We've got an academic from Victoria University coming on, Lisa Marriott, who's just written a really interesting piece about even if not in this budget coming up, it's really a good time to look at implementing a wealth tax. So that conversation will be happening tomorrow. Also, former lawyer and CEO startup Queenstown Lakes, Olivia Wensley, is going to be joining us again. Now, Olivia is a former lawyer, and she's been involved with getting some people out of Gloria Vale. So she's going to have some really interesting commentary about Gloria Vale and the report that's come out, or the ruling that's come out, that workers at Gloria Vale aren't allowed to be treated as volunteers. They need to be paid. So Olivia Wensley tomorrow on Gloria Vale, Lisa Marriott tomorrow on wealth tax, me and George and Nala will be in the studio lying on her mat as well. So other than that, thanks for joining us today, team. All the best to you and yours, and we will catch you tomorrow morning from midday. And remember, next week we are running at 10 p.m. Next week we're going to do a late night show and see what it's like and see what it feels like.
Oh, okay.
But for tomorrow, we're going to be back at midday to see what that feels like, and we will talk to you then. Hooray, team. See you later.